the hubbub started up yesterday to do with the wealth tax. And I think we should reset everything. And I think we should reset it from the very start. And this is the genesis of the conversation, where the Prime Minister was talking to Ryan Bridge on AM show yesterday about what was going to happen, what could happen in next year's election to do with tax.
Talk about tax. David Parker, my old mate David Parker, your revenue minister, was on our show on Friday, and he said there are many, many ways to have a fairer tax system. He mentioned the potential for a capital gains tax, a stamp duty, a wealth tax, a deemed income tax.
He's also, of course, said that we're sticking to our policy of no new taxes this term.
This term.
Yeah.
So that's what I want to talk about. Going into the election next year, it's entirely possible. I just want to get a steer on what's on and off the table.
The only reason I'm laughing is because, of course, we haven't prepared our tax policy for the next election yet.
But
okay, so to be honest, that's the end of conversation.
Should have been, yeah.
But I know from a journalist's point of view, you keep pushing, but actually, when it comes to the information, that's ended the conversation. I can't tell you anything, Ryan, because we don't have anything prepared for next year, right? But of course, it doesn't. I mean, like, I don't criticize Ryan for this. This is what journalists do. It's what they're told to do. But when it comes to the substantive matter within this conversation, when it comes to the information that's going to come from this, the information is now finished.
This is going to be a fairly short line of questioning.
But you've ruled out a capital gains tax while you're leader.
Yes,
that stands.
Yes.
The wealth tax been ruled out while you're leader.
I'm not going to, Ryan.
No, so that stands.
Ryan, you're asking me to project beyond into the next election and beyond, and I'm not going to do that. We haven't formulated our tax policy for the 2023 election. All that Minister Parker is doing right now, and I think, New Zealand.
I think that gets the gist of it. Yeah.
To understand
the
tax currently falls.
You want to jump in?
Yeah, I don't think. So it's great to keep pushing it and keep pushing it as the journalist, but you can't ask questions that I think are nonsensical. Asking, is there going to be a wealth tax, and we're going to talk about what this actually means, is nonsensical, because there's not like a, yes, we can go to definitions, as Newsub did in their article, and they went to a definition from the US Tax Foundation. The reason they had to do that is because there isn't a wealth tax in the sort of public discourse that everyone has can point to in New Zealand public discourse and say that's a wealth tax. There isn't a reference there to agree on, so trying to have conversations like that there is just nonsensical, because she can't answer it, because either she's going to fall into a political rabbit hole of getting caught in a U-turn like the media has successfully done, or she's going to be talking about something that hasn't even been formulated.
So I want to play a little bit more of this, because we get to the point where Ryan's saying, so you won't rule it out. So you won't rule it out.
Yeah, good.
But you said,
and now you're asking me to form a policy on information we have not yet gathered
only
yet as
because
well.
You've previously said while you were leader on a wealth tax.
Oh, no, on capital gains tax, I have said while I'm in this role, having campaigned on it many times before,
to capital gains.
We needed, and now I'm not going to set out a commentary beyond that.
Okay, so beyond that, anything's possible.
Oh, we haven't formulated a policy.
I know.
We
totally
haven't.
get
Right,
that.
so that'll do for now. It reminds me as well what you just said, George, about what the media is now doing is commenting on something that they have to speculate about, because you can't comment on their policy if there isn't a policy yet. It made me think a little bit about the commentary on some levels I'm seeing about Twitter at the moment and all the changes currently happening at Twitter. And there is lots of things happening, like people are saying that there are some algorithms being changed in the background, and that conservative commentators are picking up, Twitter followers, and then they're all, and one thing that's happening in the media is everyone's talking about the changes that Elon's making, and it's like Elon hasn't taken over yet. Like there might be changes happening in the background, but he can't implement anything for. I think he's talking about a 6-month window until he actually gets control. But they're all going, look what Elon's doing to Twitter, and he hasn't done anything yet because he doesn't own it yet. And if there are any changes happening in the background, they're happening maybe because he's coming, maybe, but they're not. He can't change anything right now. And it's a bit the same. Like Labor doesn't have a policy to critique So it's talking about what it could or couldn't be. So they're actually speculating on that speculation.
Yeah, it's the classic playbook. Remember when, for a week there, the international media were talking about a no-fly zone in Ukraine, which was just total stupidity. Had been cooked up in some corner of a Warhawk think tank in DC, and everyone had run with it, when in substance there was nothing there. A no-fly zone in Ukraine meant going to war. It was just sort of this sort of surface level discussion about absolutely nothing, right? It's so annoying.
So that conversation, I'm not saying that what I'm about to share with you is now sequentially, like it's not, maybe the timeline is not direct, but that then turns into, media outlets saying, do you think New Zealand should have a wealth tax, based on a politician saying, I don't know. Basically, the politician has said, I don't know. We haven't talked about that yet. That's turned into, do you think we should have a wealth tax? That's turned into the National Party claiming a new tax could be on the table for Kiwis after the Prime Minister on Monday didn't explicitly rule out implementing a wealth tax in the future. And part of this conversation for me is, if I and you've heard me say this a million times, George, what's the metric? Like, I love talking to American commentators, and when they say America is the greatest country in the world, I go, what's the metric for that? Now, if the metric we're setting up is, if politicians don't adhere 100% to an ideology or a policy today, then I'm going to run headlines around what they're probably going to do in the future because they didn't deny it. Then I think that's a terrible use of media in general. But if that's the metric, if that's the yardstick we're setting, imagine what the headlines for the next 18 months are going to be. How many of all political parties don't have policy formed on something yet, and they have to go, I don't know about that. We haven't got to that point yet. And then the headline's going to be the next day, well, the Greens are thinking that the All Blacks should be sent to Australia, because they wouldn't specifically rule it, whatever it is. So that then flowed on to this commentary, which then flowed on into other commentary on Today FM. We were hearing yesterday Lloyd Burr talking a bit more about this. And I do want to play this, and there's a specific reason towards the end, but we will Sam Cedar this mother, George, as I like to say. And if you want to jump at any stage, shout out, and we can pause it as we listen to it. It's a couple of minutes of Lloyd Burr's commentary on what's been happening or not happening with the Prime Minister talking or not talking about whatever a wealth tax is. Let me just say before we go this, if you're watching this right now, do you know what a wealth tax is? No, because you're being told about how good or bad it might be. But do you know what one is? We'll get to that as well.
Political breakdown. Now, one of the in vogue politicalisms, I don't know if that's a word, but we'll go with it anyway. One of the in vogue politicalisms for prime ministers is to swear on their job that they won't do something.
This is actually a very good point that Lloyd's making as well, because I don't think a politician, especially a leader, should ever say, I am or I am not definitely going to do this and I swear my job on it, because what you want to be able to do is go, I have no plans to do this. This is not in our manifesto, or you probably wouldn't use that because then you'd be accused of being a communist or something, but this is not in our charter. This is not in our policy. However, should there be, like a global pandemic and things need to change, I'm committing to this statement today based on how the economy is today. I'm not going to commit to this statement based on an unknown future and what may or may not be best for the country to bring in. So the point that Lloyd's making and is about to make is actually completely accurate and true. No politician should ever say, I will never do this, because then you kind of get that. Was it John Key who said no more taxes, and then they raised GST, and then he said it was not a tax, it's a levy? They kind of just try their work way around it. Just you say no to it. That may be wrong with John Key, but it wasn't one of the parties with an increase to GST who then tried to palm it off as not being a tax. So what they try and do is bend themselves in a pretzel to discuss why they didn't change their position, rather than actually being honest and going, you know what, when we were looking at it back then, there was definitely no requirement for it, but things have changed. You might have a policy not to buy a new car today, but in 12 months from now, your car might blow up, and guess what? Your policy is going to change that you need a new car. So that's honest and sensible, I guess, kind of conversation around policy. But yeah, before I push play, George, you want to jump in on the oversimplification that people make? You're welcome to.
No, I guess the key there is that we can call it a U-turn when it's a U-turn. I guess is the key there. But when it's so obvious that the media that there's a concerted effort to make it seem like a U-turn so that they have some story about New Zealand politics a fucking year out from the election.
Yeah.
That's when it's bullshit. But totally, yeah. Like its policies change as well. Like if that was the case, if there was some sort of U-turn here, policies change. There's a virus, there's a COVID. It's 2 years later. It's 2 years after she said, oh, we're not gonna, we won't have, we've ruled it out, or whatever. Speaking about a particular Green Party policy, which we'll get to in a second.
Let me point this out as well. If you were going in the wrong direction, a U-turn is appropriate. I fear I fear that what we're doing is setting up a system where we push politicians into a corner where they can't U-turn. If you're driving between two locations and you go the wrong way and have to do a U-turn, that's actually the appropriate thing that you need to do. If a government has made a policy promise and then, I don't know, a global pandemic hits and a U-turn would be appropriate, do we want to back them into a corner and going, oh, it's terrible they made a U-turn? Or do we want to go, oh, God, thank God they made a U-turn because they were in the wrong direction based on information they didn't know. And now they're going in the right direction and we'll get to our destination after all, rather than being 400 kilometers off in the wrong direction, staying at a fucking flea-ridden hotel because you refuse to do a U-turn just because the kids in the back seat were going to chastise you for doing a U-turn. Fuck off. Anyway, let's go.
For example, John Key used to say that he'd resign as Prime Minister before he'd raised the superannuation age from 65. And Jacinda Ardern, maybe because she saw the success of that, said exactly the same thing when she came into office. And I've noticed in recent years it's become sort of the question du jour for reporters. Will you resign as Prime Minister before XYZ happens? And I guess it's a great way of getting a straight answer because they are swearing on the very thing that they love most. Power. The PM gets a straight message out there and the reporter gets a good headline, but it's also a trap for the Prime Minister. There's no way out of it, is there? There's very little room for a painless U-turn. So in 2020, reporters set the trap for Ardern on the election campaign trail on the issue of a wealth tax.
Would you resign before you put in a wealth tax? I won't allow it to happen as Prime Minister.
There you go, an emphatic statement. I won't allow a wealth tax to happen as Prime Minister. Fast forward to today, with 30-year high inflation and a completely different economic and health outlook, and that position has changed. Here's her being interviewed on TV3 this morning.
But you're not ruling out the potential for a wealth tax, the potential for a stamp duty.
We have not worked on our tax policy for 2023.
In other words, she's not ruling it out. She's not ruling out something that she had ruled out and swore her job on just 2 years ago. And it does create a real conundrum.
It is interesting how Lloyd is like, politicians shouldn't swear their jobs on things. They shouldn't do this. It's a bad thing. Oh, she swore her job on it. You know, it feels like there's a bit of a double standard there, perhaps.
Well, yeah, they shouldn't do it, but we'll hold hold them to it anyway. Right. I mean, yeah, fair enough. But
I mean, I guess the commentary we've just done, which is we shouldn't hold them to it, because holding someone to a bad policy or a bad decision is actually going to detrimentally impact us.
No, so my point is, you said what is the metric, right? That's a question you often ask. That would be my question with this. What is a wealth tax? What are you talking about? What are you even holding the politician to?
Let's get to that. Let's just finish this. I'll skip to the end of this because there's one line that I did want to share from what Lloyd had to say about this whole thing.
Pull out of this maneuver yet. And that is why people don't trust politicians. It really does cut to the heart of her trustworthiness.
Right. I wanted to get to that point because I think this is really interesting. The commentary is basically saying she's not trustworthy. She's now think about the process to get to that. She's not trustworthy, she being the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister is not trustworthy because she said something 2 years ago. Since then, there's been a global pandemic. And when asked about that thing from 2 years ago, again today, she said, the Prime Minister said, we haven't looked at that tax policy yet. So therefore, the Prime Minister is not trustworthy. I guess what I'm just saying within the media context is that feels like a long bow to me. To say this person is not trustworthy because they haven't absolutely unequivocally confirmed what they said 2 years ago when there was, and since then there's been hundreds of millions, billions, trillions, whatever dollars of added cost to our country. But if she doesn't say exactly what she said 2 years ago, if there is definitely no evidence of a U-turn, then she's not trustworthy. George, do you want to talk to us about what a actual wealth tax is? Because I know you've got some stuff there for us to look at.
Yeah, the conversation 2 years ago was based around a Green Party policy, which is awesome, right? That the Green parties have released this policy and got it into the national news conversation. It would just be good if people were actually talking about the pros and cons of the policy,
Yes,
rather than the holding politicians to some sort of vague parameters of the policy,
totally.
or even just the word wealth tax.
Because that's what we want to do. That's why I said at the start, do you know what a wealth tax is if you're watching this? What's a wealth tax? What is a wealth tax? Because it's interesting to hear, these are the reason the wealth tax are wrong and terrible because X, Y, Z. What I haven't heard in the last 24 hours, and I'm not saying I'm across every media outlet, but what I haven't heard is, for those of you who don't know, what's a wealth tax? So it's really important for us to actually put that out there, because then we actually know what we're being told is either so terrible or so good.
Yeah, so I mean, broadly, we can assign a definition. We can say that a wealth tax is like tax basically on your assets. But what I'll do is get James Shaw to explain the specific policy, the specific Green Party policy from 2020 that was being discussed at the time, and hopefully will be discussed before the upcoming election.
To fund our guaranteed minimum income, we're proposing a contribution.
Yeah, sorry, I meant to contextualize that as well. This was in the context of the Green Party policy of a what they call it, guaranteed minimum income.
Guaranteed minimum income, we're proposing a contribution from the wealthiest 6% of New Zealanders. Wealth, by which I mean accumulated assets over $1 million, will be taxed at 1%. Wealth over $2 million will be taxed at 2%. Now, this new wealth tax applies only to net wealth after mortgages and debts are taken into account. What that means is that only the amount that you actually own counts towards this. Having a mortgage doesn't. Everything up to $1 million attracts no tax. So, if your house is worth, say, $1.2 million, but you've got a $700,000 mortgage, your net wealth is $500,000 and you won't pay any tax. But if your house is worth, say, $1.2 million and you own it outright, you'll be taxed 1% of the $200,000 above $1 million, and your contribution will be $2,000 a year. The tax is levied on individuals. So if you jointly own that $1.2 million mortgage-free house with a partner, then your net wealth will be $600,000 each and below the threshold. If you're asset rich but income poor, there will be an option to defer payments until such time as an asset is sold. And we'll close up tax loopholes to ensure everyone pays their fair share. Because if the country is doing well, we should all benefit, not just 6% of us. Now, make no mistake, this is a transformational change. But if we truly want to end poverty in Aotearoa, we need to be bold. And this is just a much fairer, much simpler way for us to help each other out when times are tough. Because in Aotearoa, we do have enough to go around. And the Green Party has a plan to make sure that all New Zealanders can live prosperous, fulfilling lives.
Yeah, so there you go. I mean, it wasn't even that full on, really, was it? What do you think of it, Pat?
Yeah, I think I'm interested in their, and that's the first time I've seen that video, which we like doing in the show as well. We like actually, it's not that we don't want to prepare for it. It's like, it's good to get first reactions. My first reactions are, I imagine if the super wealthy will then just start owning their assets with all their children, so they can divide up, like, in other words, this house, this $17 million house is now owned by me, my 3 children, my partner, my sibling, and to divide it down. But that's I guess a workaround. I guess my immediate thoughts are, and I always think of the elderly, some of the elderly who have owned houses modest houses from 20, 30, 40 years ago are now in that 1.2, 1.4, 1.8, $2 million house bracket. I wonder if it would be if I'd support their particular policy more if it excluded your family home, like they're doing with capital gains tax. If it excluded your family home, that would seem to be maybe a way to.
You mean the house you're living in?
Yeah, completely.
Mm.
I don't know. I mean, just thinking about it out loud as I'm talking about it, because it doesn't seem like a lot. But also, I wonder. I mean, we're okay, and the housing market's dropping off a bit at the moment. When they made that statement a couple of years ago, they probably need to increase it now because a lot of people's houses are worth more than $1 million, and a lot of retired people are the ones who are mortgage free. So saying that if you're a young person and you owned a $1.2 million house, well, you're probably not going to win, but if you did, chances are you do have a $700,000 mortgage. But if you're 75 and it's the same house you've lived in for the past 30 years, it might be worth that. And so you are going to need to find that money. I'd also be interested to know how they're going to pay that. Would that be at the end of the financial year? Would that be spread over payments? Like, would it be a weekly amount? If it was $2,000, would it be $40 a week, or would there be a bill at the end of the year based on your assets? What is it going to mean for calculating all of these as well? Is there going to be accountants involved as well? Yeah, but look, I mean, the ultimate thing is that is what a wealth tax is, right?
Yeah.
So now, if you were unaware, then that's an example of a wealth tax, and we were quite keen to show a New Zealand example as well, rather than go to the American example that used. So we wanted to give at least an example. So now let's make it clear, that's not Labor's policy. Labor doesn't have a policy on wealth tax because they don't have a wealth tax. But at least we know now, if you didn't know before, what an example of a New Zealand political party would want to see installed as a wealth tax.
There's an element in there that you'll also hear people refer to as a progressive tax system in the part where he says that, if it's over $1 million, then it's 1%. And if it's over 2 million, then it's 2%, etc., etc. And it's the amount of money over that million that is taxed, not the total amount.
So basically, under $1 million is nothing. Between 1 million and 2 million is 1%. Between 2 million, whatever the next threshold is 2%, and so on and on and on. And I guess that means for people who are like property investors who own half a dozen properties, then if you've got to pay, $10,000 a year more now on taxes, then that just needs to be put into the rent, which does raise the question there. The rents go up because of it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know. But we can now debate whether it's good or bad, but at least now we know there is an example in front of us of what a wealth tax is for a New Zealand political party. So let's just have a look at a conversation now that was had this morning on, it's actually the AM show again. Not to be like we're not the AM show is not our heroine and we're not drug dealers, but it's where the conversation happened to be this morning between Chloe Swarbrick, who is part of the Green Party, who does want to see a wealth tax put in, and David Seymour, who's got his eyes shut right now. Many would say has his eyes shut all the time, but mostly to economic issues. But they were talking a bit about the wealth tax, and they were talking a bit about tax in general and how it benefits the top earners and the wealthy in New Zealand. So I'll just play you a little bit of this. The conversation is specifically around housing and tax, and we pick it up with David Seymour responding.
It doesn't help a young first home buyer to know that the person selling the house is paying more tax if the price keeps going up. So we got to solve the real problems of supply and opportunity if we want a better country.
The problem,
than
David,
this tall poppy syndrome approach.
The problem with that theory is that it hasn't worked, has it? I mean, how long have you been saying that? How long has that party been saying that? And actually,
the ACT Party was the instigators of it in the 1980s.
Things at the bottom haven't gotten any better. But Chloe, equally with the
hang on, Ryan. If you're going to say that, you give me a chance to respond. Actually, it has worked. If you look at people's income, it has stayed equal over the last 80 years, unless you count housing costs. So we have a major problem with housing, but that's because we're not building enough houses. It's not because our tax system's wrong.
And in fact, we have the highest rates of inequality that we have ever had in this country since records began. And that is a consequence of the policies that were
broken
David Swarbrick. Just actually to speak to policies at present, if you look at the ACT proposal, the ACT Party's proposal rather, if you are a minimum wage earner in this country, you'll get precisely zero. Your boss, well, they might get a bit. And your boss's boss, particularly if they're earning over 180,000, well, they might get quite a bit. And that money they may choose to put into an asset like housing, which is a renter you will help to pay off,
All right.
with them getting no capital gains tax on that.
We always get to the
David-
stage where Chloe gives up on her policies and tries to explain mine.
So it was more about tax in general, but it was. I mean, there's lots of things in there. I actually think it's I don't know if it's a fair point, but interesting point made by David that goes, let's sell our own policies rather than talk about the other party's policies. But then there's also the flip side of that, which is if you want to poke holes in other people's policies, that's fine as well. So I wanted to just bring that up because that was more talking about tax in general and how, it seems it's benefiting the wealthiest, and the wealth tax is one of those things that potentially will make this a fairer system. There are, and in that interview, if you go and have a look on YouTube at the full thing, Ryan does cite economists who are saying the wealth tax is not the way forward, not the way to pull countries out of holes, and it's not working anywhere in the world. Again, that's, I guess, more research that needs to be done into that, but just to put all the info on the table for you to then go out and check on as well.